Bowties sometimes cool. Myself, Ashley, and Ed. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Ash. Twice in 2 days. This is getting to be a bit of a habit.
I know, and it's really dark here now, isn't it? It's like just after 6, and it's pitch black and cold. Hence why I'm in my PJs, which is just as well. This is audio only, really. Nobody wants to see that. We're also joined by James Sylvester, the third bow tie.
Hello, chaps. How are we doing?
Very good, and you, James?
Oh, always splendid. Yeah, everything is splendid. Equally cold and equally dark in this neck of the woods, and I'm sure this room will get steadily darker as we progress, as I haven't replaced one of my light bulbs.
But
So,
you, but you've had a nice day today. I saw your Instagram post before, and I wish I'd come round to yours for a Sunday roast. But anyway,
oh, you're always welcome. I love cooking.
I,
Cooking's
I know,
great fun.
I'll be there. Now, James, we've got a very special guest this evening, haven't we? Well, I say this evening, it's our evening. It's their morning, so a bit confusing.
Indeed.
So why would that be?
Well, tonight's ultra special guest is a gent I have been wanting to chat to for a long, long time now. I've been lucky enough to email with him back and forth over the last couple of years, which has been an honour and a delight. Known to millions of fans worldwide for his varied acting career. Not just an actor, this chap is a composer, a voice artist, a producer, a software engineer as well. And a couple of years back, responding to a very hopeful and not expected to be replied to email from yours truly, he got on board with a charity, unofficial charity, Doctor Who book project I was working on at the time called Temporal Logbook 3, Changed Lives, and contributed a very moving and honest account of a time his own life changed in a particular way, with long-reaching consequences. He is loved by fandom, and it's quite obvious he gives that love and affection back to it. Known to everybody as Chang Lee from the 1996 Doctor Who TV movie, it is an absolute joy to welcome to the show the incomparably magnificent Yee Jee Tso.
Yee Jee, how are you doing?
Not bad, thanks. Not bad.
Good man. Good man. It's really, really kind of you to make the time and give up your Sunday morning for us, sir.
It's all good. All good. Glad to be here.
Now, Edward
Lovely.
is, as always, is prepared in a very digital 21st century fashion on paper. So, which you can't see because it's green screen, Ed. We can never see it. Every time you hold it up, we can never see it.
Yeah.
But we're going to make these. We've got some questions for you because we always do. But we're going to try. We'll try and make it nice and concise for you. Uh, Maybe not all of them, Ed. Maybe not all of them. I know what you like. But if you've got some, if you don't mind answering some of our questions and some questions from listeners, we'd be immensely grateful. And I will hand over to Edward.
Sure. Ask away.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. Yeah, hi, Yee. Just thank you very, very much indeed for coming on our little show. And again, thanks to James for speaking to you and getting to arrange for you to come on. That's absolutely amazing. We're going to talk a little bit about your good self and really your career as an actor. So you're in school, little Yee Jee. Does Yee Jee or little Yee Jee in school want to be an actor? Is that something you'd always want to do? Was that had you watched TV? Had you seen people on stage and thought that's something I want to do?
Well, I guess it depends on how little we're talking about. Like in grade school, I hadn't thought about it at all. But I did grow up what they called in the 80s and 90s a latchkey kid. So basically, like I lived in a different suburb than where I went to school, and so I'd bus home, and my parents would be still at work, and I'd let myself into the house. That's what they called latchkey kid. Let myself into the house, and basically just like turn the TV on and set up a little desk in front of the TV, and I would kind of be doing my homework there, but also just watching TV. And that went on for hours every day. So like like TV was almost like a third parent. No offense to my parents. Like they were great and they did what they needed to do and whatnot. But yeah, so I think the TV was just like something that and like funny enough, I don't actually watch TV now. Like even the stuff that I'm in. Pretty much don't really get a chance to watch them. I might download an episode of something if I know that I've got a significant part in it, but I usually really don't watch any TV at all. So I guess that's this sort of ironic kind of shift in things as we change. But the question was, did I actually want to be in a, it was only in high school. I started to a lot of my friends were into kind of theater and acting, and we had a really strong theater program in my high school, and we did some musicals, and I loved music and singing. I still do to this day. So, I was in a few of the musicals, and it was a bit of an oddity at that school at the time for kids like just entering in the school. I guess you would call them freshmen or whatever. We were in grade eights. It was a bit odd for the grade eights to actually get involved in the shows, but there we were. It was myself and a friend of mine, and yeah, I think from then on is when I sort of felt like I maybe wanted to do some acting. So.
Yeah. And what was your first professional role as an actor?
It was in a show called 15. You can imagine, the quality of the show. It was that particular show was a non-union show, and it was just produced by the local television station, like BCTV, I think it was called. It was just like a regional television station. They didn't have the budget to do like a big thing. But interesting fun fact, it was also one of, if not the first professional gig that Ryan Reynolds did. Ryan Reynolds is 3 years younger than I am. I was 15, he was I think 12 or something. And he played the younger brother of the guy that I was playing the friend of. So I was like the friend, you know, the jock friend, which is ironic because I was terrible at sports. I was the jock friend. Then we had the main character, and then we had the brother, the younger brother, and it's just an interesting hook to hang my hat on. Did a show with Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
He probably would love nothing more than to forget about that show, but.
All right, open up those sandwiches and let's see what's in them. If anyone's eating tuna fish, there's gonna be big trouble.
Hey,
Cheese and tomato. You're lucky.
keep your hands off.
Hold on a second. What about those spreads? Were they cut in a leg hole trap?
So I'm going to take you back now to probably 1995. Doctor Who's been off air for getting on for 6 years, and suddenly there's this rumour that it's going to be coming back and you're going to be part of it. How did you actually get the job, or how did you even look at getting the audition for the part of Chang Li in Doctor Who?
Oh, yeah, that's a bit of a story actually. So in Canada, we have this sort of it's basically like it's a service industry, right? So mostly from the US. Sometimes we do co-productions with like the UK and whatnot, but usually it's a US production, and they'll bring it to Canada, and we kind of service them doing their whatever production they're trying to make, and we there are various reasons for that. But and so that's what was happening here. There was a lot of parties involved, and it was totally logistically a good thing to do it in Canada, in Vancouver. So what happens is that the lead characters are almost always cast somewhere else, usually LA. And that's what happened with Doctor Who. The leads were already pre-cast, but there was one character that was kind of considered a lead still, that they hadn't pinned down, and they didn't really feel the need to cast that in LA at the time. Asian actors, like visibly like ethnic actors, or didn't necessarily have a whole lot of coverage in like film and in TV. So it was still a little bit special to have a character with that much involvement in a show be an ethnic minority. And so they didn't have like a name to attach to that role, right? So they were like, oh, we'll just cast it in Vancouver. Like, we'll just do it there because it's, less expensive to cast locally to where you're shooting. So we did auditions like we normally do. And we had gone through, the initial taping with the casting director, and then subsequent 2 or 3 more auditions. And at the last audition, the network executives and everything from, Fox and Universal and probably someone from BBC as well. I know Philip Siegel was there, for example. They all, they flew into Vancouver to come and do this last audition, and it came down to a choice between 2 of us. There was this other fellow who's a great actor, and I feel terrible that I took this from him actually, but Edward. He anyway, so there was the 2 of us, and I was the auditions took place at the studio, and it was out in Burnaby, which is about I want to say about a 45-minute drive from downtown, and I live downtown. And the timing of it was such that it was like during rush hour and all of that, and I was just like a young dumb punk really who didn't really know how to be responsible for things, and I was late. I was late for the audition by like a significant amount. Like I think I probably left like not like a few minutes before the actual time of the audition, thinking I could just transport over there, right? Like I'm already thinking I'm in the TARDIS and I'm just gonna ping, like I'll just be there. When of course there's like rush hour traffic, and it was probably closer to an hour before I got there. So I was late. I was late by like a good chunk of time. And by the time I was halfway there, I was like, I've blown it. I've completely blown it. You're never supposed to be late for an audition. That's like a huge no-no for an actor to do that, especially a Canadian service actor in Canada, going to meet the bigwigs who have flown in from God knows where they've been, and they're probably making huge salaries at, thousands of dollars an hour. And I'm just like burning money, right? Like by being late. And so I was like, I've completely blown this. Like, I don't even know if they're going to see me, but I just kept going anyway, because why not? And I finally got there, and I got inside, and I was like, you know what? There's no way they're going to hire me for this. So I guess it doesn't really matter what I do. So I just kind of, okay, yeah, hi, I'm, Yee Jee, whatever. And then like just did the audition. I don't even remember anything about it. I kind of just farted it out at that point, because there's no way. I was like, there's no freaking way that they're gonna hire me for this. Like I'm screwed, right? And so we went away, and I got the notice that they're hiring me for it. And so I was surprised, obviously, but I didn't say anything about it. Went through we did the shoot and everything and whatever. And there was even a time when I was like a little bit late to get to one of the production days at that studio. Getting to that studio was. And Jeffrey Sachs, looks at me with this, it's just this like disappointment, really, like this, like, what the hell are you thinking? And like everyone's waiting, like Eric Roberts is there, they had the ambulance there, the whole crew, everyone's just like waiting for me to show up, right? It was just disaster. Like I was just a really dumb kid. So how I got the part, to answer your question finally, is it came from Philip Siegel himself. We were at this, because I didn't know. I had no idea how I got the part. We were at the, I think it was the one in Chicago, this convention, Visions, I think, right after the show got finished filming. And it was in a panel, and somebody asked the question. They were like, hey, why did you pick Yee Jee for the part? And Philip Siegel answered, and he said, well, we told the story. We'd all flown in. We were waiting to, cast this thing or whatever. Like, and Yee Jee came in, like he was like an hour late. And then he just kind of just did his thing. Like he didn't care about anything. Like he didn't give a shit. And that's exactly what we wanted for the character. We thought Chang Lee really needed to have this kind of like, screw you kind of attitude. And we really, and we felt like he really embodied that. Like, wow, he's just sauntering in here, and late, and he doesn't seem to give a crap at all. So that's why they hired me. So I mean, I don't know, it was complete luck.
And have you got any better, Sarah? Have you got any better with your timekeeping?
I've gotten slightly better with my time. Yeah, only a little bit. I have to set alarms for myself, and it's crazy.
And then, Doctor Who, it'd been off air for 6 years in the UK. It was a part of UK's cultural heritage. I mean, did you have that connection with it in Canada? Was it on anybody's radar at all in Canada? Did you have any idea of the world you were going to be stepping into?
I didn't really have a great idea about it, although I did watch. It was one of, how I was sitting in front of the TV when I was getting home from school, and so there was like a good 6 or 7 hours worth of TV that was just like happening while I was like, sitting there and doing other things. And Tom Baker's Doctor was one of the, was one of the shows that was on there. So every day, or maybe every other day, depending on the channel I was on that day, right? Like, you chose your channel and you kind of stuck with it. Like, so every other day, maybe, we'd have half an hour of Doctor Who, and that would just stream on by along with all of the other shows. So I had some familiarity with it. I don't think I could tell you like the plot line of any show that I watched when I was a kid, right? Like even the ones that were on very often, like some of the shows were on like more than once a week or whatever the repetition was, like you have your Knight Riders and Airwolf and Dukes of Hazzard. I couldn't tell you the plot lines of any one of those shows, like, but I've watched them all. So so if people ask me about like specific things in Doctor Who, I can't answer. But I do remember his hat and costume and the props and the general vibe of the things. Instead of things exploding, they were sort of just sparking, like there was a certain vibe, right? Like I remember that.
And then you're in this big revamped movie with better effects than it had ever have. So there were explosions rather than sparks in your one, but unfortunately, it didn't go to series. I mean, if it had gone to series, had you been given an option of becoming a recurring character?
We hadn't talked about it. It wasn't like they had a contract with me. Like sometimes they'll do that. They'll for a pilot, they'll lock down the actor for a contract. But if it had become a thing and they'd offered it, I would have gone for it.
Yeah.
I think it did go to series. They're just still waiting for you to arrive.
2045, and I've still got to get started and get there.
So what I noticed sort of watching it over the years is the amount of character development in a very, very short amount of screen time. It's only like 80 odd minutes of screen time for the whole thing, but the amount of real good, really well written and well acted characters there are in it. I mean, I've noticed something about your character today I've never noticed in all the times I've watched it before. But were you given any input on the character of Chang Li? Did the director ask you how do you want to play it? What do you want to do with it?
I think there was a balance of that. I mean, we had a lot of input from like Jeffrey and Philip and Matthew all had, a significant amount of influence over what they felt like they wanted from Chang Li, or at the very least what they needed in terms of moments. Director, especially a good director like Jeffrey Sachs, will really like kind of coach to the moment, right? Like they're really in film, you're kind of looking for these happy accidents, right? Like you're pretty much hoping to capture a happy accident, but every single scene is a happy accident. Like that's what you're trying to. That's that's an ideal you'll never get to, right? But they're trying to make it so that there's a natural spark that happens, and to get there, you provide a little bit of background, some context, and whatever, some guidance, but you couldn't necessarily say like, oh, you need to do this specifically, because if you lock down someone who's if you lock down an actor like too specifically, they don't get the chance to like own it themselves, and then they can't really do it like well, right? And I'm not saying, I mean, I look, obviously, I think with everybody, you look back at work you've done even 6 months ago and you're like, God, would just completely do that totally differently now, right? And so there are definitely aspects of that performance maybe a lot of aspects of that performance I would do differently today. But hey, I'm a different person now, right? So I don't know, maybe how I do it now like wouldn't actually work for what they wanted. Jeffrey, I remember walking into the session for ADR, it's automatic dialogue replacement. You basically have to replace some lines that you do that like the sound didn't get it perfectly on the day, or they have to change something about it after the fact. And walking into the ADR session, I remember, and this was the first time I would be seeing any footage or whatever, and Jeffrey turned to me and say, "Hey, you came out really well in this." So I said, "Okay, thanks." I didn't personally feel that way, after I watched it, I felt like a little bit better about it. And then the fact that Jeffrey said that to me, obviously I felt good about that. But then years later when I watched it again, I started to kind of calm down about it. Like there was some distance between myself and that anxiety of like self-criticism of work that you've done. And now I can sit and watch it and be like, oh, okay, it's actually kind of stood the test of time. And like I get how the Chang Li character like fits into the overall thing more and why he was like that. And probably more maybe but more by chance than skill, but like there were some choices there that really worked. So yeah, long story short, it was a collaborative thing. But you get certain amount of freedom as an actor. Nobody can control what's going on in your head, clearly. So that's what you get to control. You use your imagination and yourself, and you make whatever you want of it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's one scene I'm thinking of in particular. I've watched this countless times, but I watched it today purely watching your performance. The scene where Eric Roberts makes his grand entrance in that Time Lord outfit, and he puts his arm around Chang Li, and it's in the eyes. There's not a word. Chang Li doesn't say a word, but it's the look in his eyes where he suddenly realizes, yeah, I'm in with the bad guys here. That's not so good. I mean, that is a really excellent piece of character development. It's over in a couple of seconds, but really fantastically done.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's it's nice that stuff. Well, they always say that in film, or film or even TV, film more so because it's this massive screen. If you're seeing it at the theater, the person's face is like, the size of a house, right? So, what they're saying with film things, as opposed to say on the theater when you're looking at someone on stage and they're like, yards away, is that the eyes matter a lot, and I think that's something that we strive for. I think is to make our internal experience match up with what the character is, what we're if we're trying to portray anything, or if the character needs to be in a certain place for the story, we try to be there as people, so that it's in the eyes rather than anywhere else.
Yeah. And we've got a first question here from one of our listeners. Question from Geraint. He says, do you know, or were you told at the time, how close Doctor Who came to becoming a series?
I didn't know at the time. I've been told afterwards that apparently at Fox Television, they were kind of deciding whether to go with another season of Sliders or to spin up a season of Doctor Who. And, they just, Doctor Who did well enough and they were almost going to go for it. And then they were like, we'll go with the sure thing, because Sliders had already been going for 1 or 2 seasons and they felt like they could, it was a safer bet, right? Like they're always just really talking about, it's really just the big casino of film and TV production, right? It's like, hey, if I spin the roulette wheel one more time and double down, am I going to make payday or am I going to lose my shirt, right? That's all they really think about. So yeah, they made their bet, and I think at the end of the day, though, I mean, at the 50th anniversary, it was in 2013. It was celebrating the 50th anniversary at this big thing going on at the Excel in the UK there in London, or just outside London. And Phil Collinson, one of the producers of the new series, he gave this really quite a profound gift, I think, to Daphne and I. He took us aside. I don't even know how he found us. He was just like randomly, we were walking through the hotel or something, or the convention center. He kind of like, hey, and he saw Daphne and I, just kind of collected us off into this like cafe that was just happened to be there. I don't know. We walked over to somewhere, and he started talking about how a lot of the decisions that they made for the new series, a lot of the things that they were trying to do with the new series, they needed it to be new. They needed to be a departure from the classic series, and they had to decide what they could keep and what they could change. And a lot of the things that they were trying to change and trying to, modernize the series into what it would become, he said they couldn't have done it without the TV movie. Like he's like, we used what was in the TV movie as a stepping stone to get there. And if the TV movie wasn't there, if there was just this hole, they would have to have done that step, right? And so the Chris Eccleston's Doctor, that whole entry into the new series, it wouldn't have been the same. They wouldn't have been able to do it. They'd have to step back to something in between, and arguably the show wouldn't have been as good. Like they wouldn't have been able to make it what it is. Like, you know, if you have to change it that significantly, if you go back in time and do the, you know, changing of history, and you make the show now something completely different because it had to cater to this like huge gap, maybe it wouldn't have picked up, right? Like maybe it wouldn't have gotten to where it had gotten to by the time the 50th anniversary came around. We're not Time Lords. We might have screwed it up completely. So, you know, he helped us a lot by, you know, attributing some measure of the success of the show being able to go on to that existing. He, at the very least, he was saying that TV movie had its place and it needs to be there, right? So I think that felt really good.
Yee Jee, that's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for taking time to answer my questions. I'm now going to hand you over to the third bow tie, the wonderfully erudite Mr. James Sylvester, who I'm sure has some fantastic extra questions for you.
Oh, it's always lovely to be handed over to you. Thanks. Cheers. It's an absolute pleasure after having emailed you incessantly so many years now to actually meet in person for the first time. Really appreciate your time again. I'm really, you know, fascinated by a lot of what you've been saying about the background. A few things that I've noted. I mean, you've mentioned sliders earlier on in when you were talking with Ed. I know you were in a couple of episodes of that. You've you know, established yourself, you're a character actor across many genres, but you quite often come back to sci-fi, comic book, fantasy genres. I think Highlander, Battlestar Galactica, Blade, things like that. I think you've done in the past as well. I mean, is that all luck of the draw, or is that a genre you feel particularly at home in?
I mean, I think it's a bit of both, because for a long time in Vancouver we were shooting a lot of that stuff, and so, you know, a good portion of the opportunities we would get as actors, you know, would be made up of that type of material. But then also beyond that, you know, insofar as we did have auditioned for other genres and, you know, and so forth, maybe there's something a little bit of our personal preferences in when we do auditions, right? Like that kind of gets in there. Because I love, you know, I'm a sci-fi and fantasy fan myself. You know, I loved, as I said, I watched Doctor Who, I watched Star Trek, Star Wars, the whole gamut. You know, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I read that to my kids. You know, all of the fantasy stuff. I've read pretty much I've read about half of Joe Abercrombie's stuff, and definitely all of the Lord of the Rings stuff, and the and Brandon Sanderson. We've read everything Brandon Sanderson's ever put out. So, you know, I'm well and truly into the like fantasy and sci-fi kind of genres myself. So, you know, if one of them pops up, maybe there's like this affinity to the genre that kind of makes it happen. I don't know. We don't get to control necessarily what opportunities come our way, but we do the best we can with all of them. And, you know, I don't know.
It's in the stars. It's being directed there for a reason, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned again, you and Daphne were at the 50th anniversary, and you know, Phil Collinson's lovely words to you, which, you know, I think we've talked about that before in another show. I think we all agree with that the series it wouldn't be what it is now without the movie having been there. And despite it being one episode, one TV movie, you and Daphne have come back together and done a number of Big Finish stories together as different characters because of all, you know, the rights issues, etc., which we don't need to talk about in too much detail. But it's just, I always think that there's an awful lot of affection for yourself, Daphne, Paul, Eric, you know, that whole crew. You know, there are a lot of people who are hoping one day somehow we might see some kind of further adventures for the three of them. And it feels like, you know, as a fan, that there's a lot of love for you all. Is that something you found yourself? Do you find that reciprocated when you do the conventions and you talk to fans? Do you get that impression from them?
Yeah, I mean, I've never felt more like of the sort of commitment to the franchise, I guess, right? Like that, and I mean, I have a limited sample size of franchises that I've been involved in, like, or whatever. But I will but I'll say I really love that there's this huge diversity of different types of people who are into Doctor Who. And I think it's a little bit different from some of the other sci-fi shows in that it's got the action component. There's definitely action and there's definitely a thriller kind of component to it, but there's also something else. I think there's a bit of it's like you're in university and you're listening to a, not a lecture, that's the wrong word, but you've got a very enigmatic professor, right? And this element of this character, who's themselves gone through a lot of different changes and has a lot of diverse different sort of ways of presenting themselves. Some of the philosophical ideas, some of the moral and sort of like human sort of introspection that happens, right, with Doctor Who, I think is it brings a special flavor to it. And I feel like this is totally subjective and I could be making it up, but I feel like that is reflected in the types of people who are drawn to it, and always very respectful, always bringing a level of thoughtfulness, I think, to their fandom and their creativity around it, right? So
I mean, again, at the start when you were talking about how you got the part, I mean, it's a great story. I was struck, when we first got in touch a couple of years ago, when you were utterly forward for us about a significant change in your life following that nasty accident that you'd had back in the day. And you've taught us as well now about you're not the person you were, and hinted at it as well. But does that change in the way you've approached life, and that change because of the way it came about? Does that impacted or altered, do you think, the way you approach roles?
Yeah, I mean, how could it not, right? It's like I think that if you let yourself, there are people in the world who don't change. I feel like, if that were the case, you're really fighting the currents, right? And it's gonna wear you down. And it probably brings you, no end of pain. And I can't think of any good that comes from it. But some people will fight change to the, tooth and nail. And so, but I'm not that person. Whether it's because it was like, kind of forced on me by circumstance or just something that I'm naturally inclined towards, but I find myself adapting to change often. And I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. I can't imagine trying to approach anything like acting, for example. Like if I was given the character, like I'll repeat myself from earlier, if I was given the same character to do again, I would do it differently. And it might not be the right choice this time, right? I might not get cast for that role because I would be doing it differently. But the fact remains, if you were to give me the same role, I'd do it differently. So if there was one of these situations, like I've come across some fan fiction where people are writing about Chang Li and he's come back, he'd be a different person. You couldn't expect the same Chang Li to be, in that version of the show. And I think fans would be okay with that. Whoever was watching it, I think they wouldn't expect a 30 years older Chang Li to be the same, right? No. I mean, so many of our stories too. I mean, the archetype of, the journey for a character in a story is change, right? Like, I think we really I think it's baked into us that we, even if we resist it ourselves, even if we're the kind of person who like really resists changing, we look for it, we seek it in the stories, right? So, yeah.
No, and agree absolutely, and I think it's very admirable and generous of you to be as open as you are and publicly open as you are with some of those changes and some of the ways different challenges in life impact you. Was it during or just after COVID? You added your blog to your website. You've talked openly about things like anxiety issues. You're very open about how committed you are to your family and stuff like that. And for someone who has an audience and people who follow him, it's a very brave thing to do, to be so open. On a personal level, I'm very grateful for it because, having had similar things myself, it's lovely to hear someone you watch, someone you admire, share that kind of thing. So,
I think that if there's anything to be gained or learned by anyone, through reading or learning about something that I've done or gone through or whatever, then that makes whatever challenge that was, it makes it more worthwhile, right? Like maybe I, made some mistake or flailed around or did some silly thing when I was younger, and maybe it caused me or somebody else some amount of grief. But if someone today can learn from that or benefit from it, then it makes it okay,
And again, before I shut up and let Ed finish with a couple of extra questions, I mean, growth and change, it's a constant theme in your career, in your life. You've extremely multi-talented chap. There's the acting, the photography, obviously your day job with software work. You produce, you've done sound work. You're a musician as well, I believe. A couple of things to do, because I wanted to bring in your daughter's band as well. I know you do some sound mixing for your daughter's band, who, Ed, you'll love them, check them out. But is there a particular, are you an actor primarily, or is it a case of you want to continue to grow, you want to continue to be good and excel at as many things as you can?
I don't think I'd ever be able to just do the one thing. I don't know if it's because, whether it's a neurodivergent thing or whether it's like I just don't have the discipline to stick with one thing for very long. But I'm like you're like a kind of prototypical generalist, right? Like I'm gonna do a lot of different things. And if that means I'm master of none, then it means I'm master of none. I think eventually over the course of decades, if you get into enough things and you kind of keep working on all of them, like eventually you do get to a level of comfortability with many or maybe even all of those things, right? So I have a level of comfortability now with music and music production that I didn't have, say, even 2 or 3 years ago, right? Like I look at stuff I put out there 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm like, eesh, I could totally redo that, and I probably will, right? And then same with anything, same with writing, with acting for sure, software engineering. I look at code that I wrote like a year ago, and I'm like, wow, I do that totally different now. So, I think while there's pros and cons to not being particularly focused on one thing, I like the pros more than I dislike the cons.
I'm with you on that. I think the chaps know I'm always coming up with silly ideas saying we should do this. And then I never follow them through though. They always fade away, which is probably a good thing, as most of them are ridiculous. But anyway, I really appreciate you again being as open as you are and being as approachable as you are. Because I know you'll get a lot of these requests and a lot of irritating people I meet emailing you all the time. So for you to spend the time with us today, it's really, really kind and appreciated. So thank you.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean the email, I feel bad because I'm not good at answering every single email. I have I'll joke with my wife sometimes or whatever. But if I don't manage my inbox for like a couple of days, it'll start going into the hundreds, and then I feel completely lost and I don't want to look at it at all. Right now I have like 1,000 unread emails. I'm like, when can I carve out the time to actually look at these? And I will eventually try to get through the list, but it's just like this. I've mistakenly made email kind of like my central place for all these communications to come in, and I just I've done a poor job of managing my life that way. I don't
know. Snap.
So thanks for that, James. Before we let Yee Jee get on with his day, we've just got one more question from one of our listeners on Twitter, from Rob Keeley, and it sort of touches on something you've already mentioned, Yee Jee. So it's, would you like to make a guest appearance in the new series of Doctor Who with Ncuti Gatwa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be I think it would be fun to appear in the new series. I'm not. I mean, yeah, I'm curious about how that would work. I mean, I guess you could bring in like you could bring in any character really from any of the Doctors, like, or any of the like era. You could bring, like any of the companions or any past character. Like, I suppose you could bring them back because of the sort of vast nature of what the TARDIS does and where the Doctor goes and does and the time and everything. So I guess it's always I guess I wouldn't have to wonder too much about the mechanics of how it would work. I'd leave that up to people who are better at that stuff than I am. But in terms of like, I think the one bit that I would imagine to be really really fun is the discovery that you're speaking to the same person. Right. Or I mean, I know, can you call the Doctor the same person throughout all their reincarnations? I guess, yeah, I think people do want that sense of continuity that it is the Doctor. With all of the caveats in mind that these are very different people, obviously, that are playing them. And also it's a different presentation of the Doctor, but okay, it's the same. So, but that discovery, right? That moment of like, let's say I was like, whatever, middle-aged Chang Li that the Doctor happens to run into. I'm just whatever. I can't imagine. I don't know if you're sitting at a cafe or something like that, and just like somebody's talking to you, and all of a sudden this line comes out of their mouth that like is harkens back to this time with the Doctor that only he would know, or she, or whatever's happening at the time. And just the kind of be like, what? Like that sort of, and I wouldn't be, I mean, obviously, like I would have had some experience with that, with the regeneration. So I think Chang Li would be in a position to put two and two together. And I think that would be an interesting moment to watch, and to play. Other than that, I have no idea how it would work or be, it would manifest itself. It'd be interesting. I'd definitely do it. Do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that question, Rob. And I hope Yee answered that to your satisfaction. And on that note, I'm going to say a massive, massive thank you to Yee for spending time answering myself and James's questions this evening, and hand on over to Ash to wrap up.
Thank you very much, gents. Thank you very much. Fabulous questions as always. And Yee Jee, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure. Again, another guest who I realised well, I'm sure you're the same, had very similar childhoods, really, watching lots of TV programs, but have no idea what they were about. And I still don't. Although my dad does remind me with Dukes of Hazzard, how I upset him once because I wanted him to weld the doors together on his car. And so he could just climb in and out the window, and just climbing in out the window.
Jump
and
in.
then, yeah. And then when I think I referred, because we had an Astra, which I put a picture up on the screen, and it was an orange Astra. It would have looked ridiculous with a 01 on the side, but it might have worked. But then he was really upset when I said to him, "You need to get a white car." I think he thought I was trying to compare him to Boss Hogg, and he. And I suppose really I was. But anyway, there we are. So on that bombshell, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from Yee Jee.